He found her in the rain, the same way he lost her. The city was asleep, but Sterling Industries still glowed like a wound against the skyline. Clara Hale, her brown skin slick with rain, stood at the edge of the marble steps, clutching a broken ID card in her hand. Her curls were soaked flat against her cheeks, and her janitor's uniform hung heavy, darkened by water and tears. Adrian Sterling stood a few feet away, his suit drenched, the cold mask he wore for years cracking beneath the storm. His voice, once calm, precise, untouchable, trembled. "You lied to me," he said, eyes shining with something he'd never shown anyone: fear. She smiled, brokenly. "You wanted control, Adrian. You just never knew what it cost." He stepped forward, she stepped back. The thunder rolled between them. Before we go fully into the story, comment which city you are watching from. Also subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our subsequent heartwarming stories. Clara Hale stepped off the subway and looked up at the glass tower of Sterling Industries. It was one of those buildings that just yelled money, steel, and seriousness. For a long time, nothing in Clara's life had been serious, mostly just scraped by. But today was the start of something new. Clara was a woman you might pass on the street and think nothing of, which was just how she liked it. She had these kind, tired eyes that had seen too much struggle, but they were framed by a smile that, once it broke through, could light up a room. Her uniform, fresh and a little stiff, covered a resolve that was anything but plain. She wasn't just here to mop floors, she was here to build a life. Upstairs, the quiet of the executive floor was shattered by the arrival of Adrian Sterling. Now, he was impossible to ignore. Tall, sharp, and dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Clara's car, Adrian looked like a statue carved from granite. His dark hair was always perfect, his jawline was tight, and his eyes were the color of a cold winter sky. He didn't just walk into a room, he commanded it. The staff shrank back, whispering, because everyone knew the truth. No janitor lasted a week working for Adrian Sterling. He was simply too demanding, too cold. Clara, still finding her feet and carrying a tray stacked with used coffee cups, didn't see him coming. She rounded the corner near his office. The very air felt colder there, and it happened. Adrian stopped short to snap a command at his assistant. Clara stumbled. A splash of hot, dark coffee went right onto the front of his pristine, custom-made gray suit. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was the sound of a million-dollar career possibly ending. Adrian slowly looked down at the dark stain blooming across his chest. He looked back up at Clara, his cold eyes narrowed. The fear hit Clara, but something stronger pushed it aside. She wasn't going to grovel. She stood taller, facing the towering CEO. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice quiet but steady. She didn't shriek or cry. She just offered a simple, honest apology. "I am so sorry. That was entirely my fault." Adrian waited for the tears, the frantic excuses. They never came. Instead, he saw the spark in her tired eyes. Not fear, but a flicker of defiance, like she dared him to fire her. The irritation was there, hot and sharp, but underneath it, a tiny sliver of something unexpected: interest. He didn't fire her. He didn't yell. He just took a deep breath, the movement tightening the fabric over the stain. "Clean it up, Ms. Hale." Clara Hale. "Clean it up, Ms. Hale," Adrian repeated, his voice low, before sweeping past her and into his office, leaving her alone with the wet, dark patch of the impossible morning. Clara watched the door close. Her hands were shaking, but a tiny, determined smile touched her lips. She had faced the cold beast and hadn't run away. Maybe, just maybe, this job wouldn't be like the others. If Sterling Industries was a kingdom, then Adrian Sterling's executive floor was its icy fortress. Everything was precise. His office, a fortress of steel and glass overlooking the entire city, was sterile, almost empty. Even the pens on his desk were lined up perfectly, like tiny, metal soldiers. This wasn't just a CEO. This was a man whose life was built on obsessive control. He believed perfection was the only thing that kept the chaos of the world away. Clara was scrubbing a spill near the water cooler when a veteran administrative assistant named Maria paused, her eyes wide with warning. Maria had been at Sterling longer than the marble floors. "Listen to me, love," Maria whispered, leaning in. "You survived the coffee, but that was luck. There are rules here. Unspoken ones." Maria quickly laid out the scripture of Adrian's world. Never make eye contact. It was like challenging him. Never speak unless spoken to. Your voice didn't exist in his presence. And the most sacred rule of all, never touch his space when he is in it. The only thing Adrian hated more than imperfection was being surprised. Clara listened, nodding politely, but inside, a tiny seed of stubbornness began to grow. These rules weren't about respect. They were about fear. The next day, Adrian was glued to his glass desk, focused on a document. He was in his zone, cold and still. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the polished floor. It was the perfect time for a janitor to disappear, to respect the sacred rule. But Clara walked right in. She quietly set down her cart, the slight squeak of the wheel cutting through the tense silence. She didn't look at Adrian, but she started her work, wiping down the chrome wastebasket, clearing a pile of discarded papers. She was cleaning his office while he was still inside. It was a deliberate, quiet rebellion. Adrian didn't even flinch at first. He just sat there, the tension in the room thick enough to cut. Finally, he slammed his pen down, the sound echoing loudly. Clara stopped, her hand hovering over a smudge on the glass wall. She turned to face him, still not meeting his eyes, giving him the respect of her attention. "Ms. Hale," Adrian's voice was low, dangerous, and perfectly calm. "You were told the rule. The office is off limits when I am here." Clara took a deep breath. "With respect, Mr. Sterling, I was hired to clean. If I wait for you to leave, I won't finish until midnight. My time is just as valuable as the money you pay me." She finally looked up, her gaze steady. Adrian stayed back, searching for the fear that should have been there. He found none. He leaned back in his chair, a shadow of a smile playing on his lips. "You're either incredibly brave," he drawled, his tone dangerously close to fascination, "or you're utterly stupid." Clara simply picked up her cloth and finished wiping the smudge, her small act of defiance hanging in the air. She hadn't backed down, and he hadn't fired her. She had shattered the first rule, and somehow, the cold, controlled air in the office felt just a tiny bit warmer. Maybe, just maybe, this man hadn't met a truly determined woman before. The next morning, Adrian Sterling wasn't in his office. This was the moment Clara had been waiting for. She didn't come to Sterling Industries just to clean floors. She came for answers. Her gaze landed on the only personal item in the vast room, a heavy silver frame tucked away on a low shelf. Inside was an old, faded photo of two young men, grinning, their arms thrown over each other's shoulders. One was a younger, kinder-looking version of Adrian Sterling's father. The other, with his wide, easy smile, was Clara's dad, Daniel. Clara pulled out her cheap phone and, with hands that barely trembled, she took a quick, silent picture. That photo was the key to everything. The sight of her father's face brought the memory crashing back. It wasn't a soft memory, but one sharp with heat and dust. Clara was just a teenager when the news came. The factory explosion. It was a massive tragedy, ruled an accident. But Daniel Hale had always told his daughter that the owners were cutting corners. The owners? Sterling Industries. Clara remembered the funeral, the cold rain, and the way the Sterling family lawyers arrived to offer a tiny, insulting settlement. Her dad had always trusted Mr. Sterling Sr., believing in that friendship from the photo. That trust cost him his life. Clara wasn't looking for money. She was looking for justice and the truth her father deserved. Meanwhile, a floor below, the staff were placing bets. In this cold office culture, Adrian's janitor drama was the only excitement. Maria, the veteran, was collecting the cash. "I say she's gone by Friday," whispered a guy named Neil, placing his money down. "No one crosses him twice and stays." "A fiver says she makes it to Tuesday next week," counted another assistant. Adrian wasn't part of the betting, but he was thinking about Clara. He had asked his head of security for a complete background check. The file came back thin. Clara Hale. Clean record. Worked 3 minimum wage jobs to put herself through college. Nothing about vengeance. Nothing about a connection to the past. Intriguing, Adrian thought. She was exactly as advertised, a hard worker who needed the job. Yet, her eyes held a secret he couldn't place. Back in the office, Clara tucked her phone away. She felt the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future. The odds were stacked against her, and the whole office was waiting for her to break. But she wasn't leaving. Not until she knew why her father's photo was in that office. Clara finished polishing the glass, her reflection staring back at her. She wasn't just a janitor. She was a daughter on a mission, and with that hidden photo, she had finally found her starting point. The truth was buried here, and she was the only one digging for it. The office still smelled like expensive cologne and ambition, but for Clara, the air felt different now. Every corner of Sterling Industries wasn't just a workspace. It was a clue. The photo of her father gave a direction, and now, fueled by that quiet determination, she started moving with a new purpose. She began her subtle snooping. During the late hours, Clara would start cleaning the common areas, slowly working her way toward the restricted floors. She would use the emergency stairwell, her movements silent, the rubber soles of her shoes barely whispering on the concrete. She pretended to be scrubbing a stubborn stain right outside the executive research section, lingering near the door. It was on one of these late-night excursions that she met Leo. He was a kind, round man who fixed the air conditioning units and the pipes, always wearing a faded boiler suit and a weary smile. He saw Clara poking around a locked server closet, and instead of raising an alarm, he just chuckled softly. "You look lost, love," Leo said, his voice warm and easy, like a trusted uncle. "This floor is for the folks who wear neckties, not rubber gloves." Clara smiled, relieved he wasn't aggressive. "Just looking for a tougher cleaning solution. These carpets are fighting me." Leo shook his head, looking sad for a moment. "Tougher cleaning solutions don't fix what's really wrong with this place. Careful what you look for, Clara. Sometimes, what's buried should stay buried." His words were a warning, but his eyes held genuine concern. Was he an ally who knew too much, or a rival who wanted her gone? Clara filed his words away. Just as she was trying to get a better angle near a row of filing cabinets marked confidential, the elevator doors whooshed open. Adrian Sterling stood there, crisp and imposing, clearly working late, too. He saw her instantly. He didn't rush or shout. He simply walked toward her, his gaze ice cold. He stopped a foot away. "Ms. Hale, this is the third time I've found you hovering near areas that are not on your cleaning roster. Are you lost again?" This was it. The moment she was fired, the mission over. But Clara didn't flinch. She kept her face perfectly composed, looking not at his eyes, but at the lapel of his perfect suit. "Not lost, Mr. Sterling. I was checking the fire exit signs." She pointed calmly to a dull spot on the silver sign above his head. "I noticed a slight smudge on the L in local. Perfection requires consistency, doesn't it, sir? I was just ensuring your fire code signs were up to the Sterling standard." Adrian was shocked into silence. He actually glanced up at the sign, a slight frown crossing his face. The lie was shocking in its composure, and the way she had turned his own obsessive perfectionism back on him was breathtaking. He looked back down at her. He saw the janitor, but he also saw the woman who stood her ground. He couldn't prove she was lying, and he certainly couldn't yell at her for caring too much about the Sterling standard. He paused, then gave a curt nod. "See that it stays clean, Ms. Hale." He walked past her, intrigued but also dangerously aware that this cleaning woman was playing a game he didn't understand. Clara, her heart pounding against her ribs, knew she had just bought herself more time. The surface was calm, but the battle was finally beginning. The fight for truth often happens in the quiet moments, in the places where no one thinks to look. For Clara, that place was the unused executive lounge on the 40th floor, smelling faintly of stale cigar smoke. She was mopping the marble when she heard voices from the balcony. It was Roger and Thomas, two well-known executives, men in expensive suits who looked down on everyone. Their whispers were sharp and urgent. They weren't talking about market strategy. They were talking about betrayal. "It has to be today," Roger hissed. "Before the board meeting. We leaked the Q3 earnings forecast to the competitor, and Sterling's presentation crashes. We make a fortune on the stock drop. Clara's heart seized. She wasn't sure what a Q3 forecast was exactly, but she knew leaking company information to crash a presentation meant sabotage. It meant destroying the company, and was destroying jobs. Her job, Leo's job, Maria's job, all of it hanging on Adrian Sterling's success. She might hate the CEO, but she wouldn't let these thieves win. The board meeting was in 2 hours. Adrian was locked in his office, rehearsing his pitch. Clara knew she couldn't just walk in and tell him. He'd dismiss her, or worse, think she was the spy. She had to be subtle. She slipped into the main boardroom, where the presentation was already loaded onto the huge screen. Using a moment when the technician stepped away for coffee, Clara did the only thing she could think of. She opened the digital file and changed one critical number on the opening slide. Just a single digit, one that wouldn't crash the system but would instantly look wrong to an expert. When Adrian finally stepped up to the massive screen to begin his pitch, he was perfection itself, smooth, commanding, cold. He clicked to the first slide, and a sudden, audible ripple of confusion ran through the room. Mr. Sterling, the head of finance, interrupted, frowning. The Q3 projection number on the screen, it's drastically incorrect. Adrian squinted at the screen. The number was indeed absurdly low, a figure that would cause the panic the executives wanted. But before the panic could spread, Adrian's sharp mind instantly recalculated. He saw the mistake wasn't in the logic of the slide, just a single typo. He instantly dismissed the issue, corrected the number aloud, and continued his presentation without missing a beat, smoothly sailing past the danger. Later that evening, Adrian asked his assistant to review the presentation files. They found the file had been altered, but no system breach could be found. Someone had physically accessed the room and changed the number. The change hadn't harmed the presentation. It had saved it, forcing him to notice the leaked number before the conspirators could use it against him. Adrian watched Clara cleaning the hallway. He saw the same quiet composure, the same tired eyes. But now, he also saw resolve, intelligence, and maybe loyalty. She was a janitor who cleaned his office while he was inside, who saved his presentation, and who gave him nothing but composure when he challenged her. He still didn't know her secret. But for the first time, the cold, unshakable CEO realized he wasn't indifferent to her anymore. Adrian Sterling, the man who trusted no one, was beginning to look at his new janitor with a flicker of genuine respect. The ice was cracking. The shift in the air between Clara and Adrian was almost electric, but Clara didn't let the new, fragile respect distract her. That wasn't why she was there. She was hunting for justice, and she knew the truth about her father's death had to be hidden deep within the old archives of Sterling Industries. Armed with her key card and a mop bucket as her perfect disguise, Clara finally found the access she needed to the old record storage. It was dusty, silent, and smelled like forgotten paper and old history. She started sorting through heavy, outdated binders, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Then she saw it. Tucked away in a file labeled Legacy Assets, Disaster Audit 1998, was a slim folder with her father's full name, Daniel Hale. Clara pulled it out, her hands shaking, finally connecting the pieces. Inside, she found a typed report. It detailed the fatal factory explosion, but the conclusion hit her like a punch to the gut. The report claimed that Daniel Hale, her kind, honest father, was the one responsible. It stated he had ignored safety protocols and bypassed a critical system right before the blast, all to save time. It named him as the culprit. Clara stayed at the documents. The signatures were old, the paper felt brittle, but the lie was fresh and agonizing. Her father was an innocent man who had died a hero. The Sterling family had not only failed to protect him, they had forged evidence to protect their company's name. Adrian's father must have created this file to protect his own legacy. A cold, hard rage settled in Clara's stomach. This wasn't just a cover-up, it was a character assassination. She quickly snapped photos of the report, her mission now clearer and far more dangerous than she had imagined. Just as she was sliding the file back into the dark recess, a familiar sound echoed down the concrete hall, the sharp, measured tapping of expensive leather shoes. Adrian Sterling was walking toward her. He must have a sixth sense for trouble. He stopped at the entrance, his shadow long and dark across the floor. He didn't look angry. He looked weary. "Ms. Hale," he said, his voice flat. "I thought I instructed you to keep to your designated areas. What exactly are you looking for down here in the company's oldest trash?" Clara straightened up, the Daniel Hale file now safe behind her. She had been caught, red-handed, in a restricted area near highly confidential documents. She waited for the cold lecture, the immediate firing, and the threat of security. But it never came. Adrian walked closer, not looking at the files, but directly at her. He saw the dust on her cheek and the fierce, protective fire in her eyes. His expression softened in a way the staff had never seen. He didn't mention the rules, the trespassing, or the files. He just sighed, a sound of heavy exhaustion. "It's the way you stand up to me, you know. The way you look at me without flinching." He looked away, across the dimly lit room, lost in a sudden, quiet memory. He turned back to Clara, and his next words were a low, vulnerable whisper, shattering the cold air of the archives. "You remind me of someone I lost." Clara stood frozen, the shock of his unexpected admission wiping all the defiance from her face. His mask had slipped, revealing a brief, deep loneliness she recognized instantly. Her planned defense died on her lips. She didn't know who he had lost, but in that moment, she saw the real cost of being Adrian Sterling. Her fight was against his family's legacy, but maybe not against the man standing in front of her. The truth was dirty, but maybe Adrian Sterling wasn't. The whole city had been grumbling all afternoon, a dark, bruised sky promising trouble. When the rain finally hit, it was a sudden, violent downpour, the kind that rattles the windows of the highest skyscrapers. Clara was hauling her cart toward the service elevator when Sterling Industries suddenly went silent. The lights didn't just dim. They died completely, plunging the hallway into thick, emergency-light gloom. The hum of the massive building vanished, replaced only by the roar of the wind and rain outside. She heard a frustrated curse and realized Adrian Sterling was nearby. He was holding a file, clearly heading out late, as usual. "Ms. Hale," he commanded, his voice sharp in the darkness. "The stays. Now." Clara nodded, but before either could move, a low, mechanical grinding sound echoed from the elevator shaft. The emergency backup must have kicked in, sending the executive comm moving slowly. Adrian, always seeking the fastest, most efficient route, didn't hesitate. He stepped into the elevator, assuming Clara was following. She did. The door slid shut just as the storm launched its final, devastating blow, a blinding flash of lightning, followed by a thunderclap that shook the steel cage. The backup power failed. The car dropped a few feet with a sickening lurch, then stopped dead, suspended between floors. The lights went out entirely. They were alone in absolute darkness, the space small, their breathing audible. Adrian, the man of obsessive control, hated two things: unexpected stoppages and confined spaces. "This is unacceptable," he muttered, pacing the tiny space until Clara spoke, her voice surprisingly calm. "Pacing won't help, Mr. Sterling. The fire department knows. We just have to wait." There was a long silence, broken only by the rain. Then, Adrian surprised her. "Who did you remind me of, Ms. Hale? You deserve to know." Clara leaned against the cool metal wall. "Who did I remind you of?" "My mother," Adrian confessed, the words raw and quiet. "She was the only person who ever told me I was wrong and didn't apologize for it." He explained how she, too, had a stubborn, quiet strength, and how she had died young. He'd built his fortress because he couldn't bear to lose anyone else. Clara saw past the billionaire's facade to the lonely boy hiding inside. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling. That kind of loss leaves a hole." Adrian looked at her, truly looked at her, in the dim, shaky light of her phone screen. They spoke not as CEO and janitor, but as two people who had both lost a parent too soon. For the first time, Clara felt a spark, not of rage for the past, but a genuine emotional connection to the complicated, guarded man beside her. As the emergency lights flickered back on, bathing them in a weak, yellow glow. Adrian's face was closer than it had ever been. He saw the fire in her eyes, not as defiance, but as passion. Clara saw the deep, desperate need for connection in his. The elevator shuddered and began to move again. The literal sparks of the storm were replaced by a potent, undeniable emotional electricity. The truth about the past still stood between them. But now, something powerful and new had sparked into existence. The ice was gone. The current was flowing. The executive floor was usually as quiet and predictable as a marble statue. But after the elevator incident, a strange new energy started to ripple through Sterling Industries. The staff, already obsessed with the janitor who broke the rules, now had something even better, proof of change. Adrian Sterling didn't shout anymore when Clara was near. He might give her a brief nod, or pause his conversation just long enough for her to pass, a small courtesy he extended to absolutely no one else. Once, Maria swore she saw him actually smile when Clara fixed a crooked picture frame in the hallway. These tiny shifts were the equivalent of a loud, brass band announcing a new relationship in the sterile world of the Sterling Tower. The whispers began instantly. They traveled faster than the elevator and were far more destructive than a coffee spill. Did you see how he looked at her during the morning briefing? I hear she got stuck in the lift with him during the storm. They were alone for 2 hours. The story wasn't about the leak anymore, or even the coffee. It was all about the janitor and the boss. People whispered about Clara's quiet nerve and Adrian's sudden, unexpected humanization. No one was listening more closely than Maya, Adrian's personal assistant. Maya was sharp, polished, and had worked tirelessly for years, hoping to earn more than just a paycheck. She wanted Adrian's respect, maybe even his attention. She had always dismissed Clara as invisible, and now this invisible woman was receiving the kind of warmth Maya had always craved. Jealousy is a poison that makes you look for date, and Maya was suddenly very, very thirsty. She knew Adrian had run a background check on Clara Hale, and she knew exactly where the files were stored. Late one afternoon, claiming to be updating employee emergency contacts, Maya accessed the confidential server. She pulled up the full file on Clara. It detailed her education, her past jobs, and the clean record Adrian had already reviewed. Maya scrolled quickly, searching for anything, a bad debt, a lie, anything to prove that this janitor wasn't what she seemed. Then she found the old, archived factory accident report that Adrian's security team had failed to connect to Clara. It didn't name Clara, but it detailed the incident that killed Daniel Hale, the same last name. Maya's eyes narrowed. Why was Adrian's father's disaster audit mentioned in the file of the new janitor? This was too big to be a coincidence. Maya printed the entire file, her hands clammy with excitement. She had found the weakness, the secret agenda that Adrian missed. This wasn't a romance. This was retribution, and Maya had just been handed the power to expose the janitor and reclaim her place. Clara, busy cleaning the glass walls, felt the change in the air. It wasn't just curiosity, it was malice. But she didn't look down. She had come for justice, and she was so close to making Adrian see the truth. She knew the road ahead would be tough, but she never expected her greatest enemy to be a jealous woman with a printed file. The path to justice was about to get very, very complicated. The tension in Sterling Industries was boiling over. The board, panicked by the earliest sabotage attempt and the constant threat of leaks, was applying heavy pressure to Adrian. They wanted answers, stability, and someone to blame. Adrian, despite his calm exterior, was working at a furious, unsustainable pace, trying to plug every hole in his empire. Clara noticed the strain etched around his cold eyes. He wasn't sleeping. One afternoon, he personally asked her to accompany him to one of the older, semi-used production floors, a massive, dusty warehouse that was a constant source of maintenance leaks and sabotage attempts. I need eyes that look for problems, Ms. Hale, he explained, without looking at her. Not eyes that look for promotions. They spent the next 3 hours together in that cold, echoing space. Clara wasn't scrubbing floors. She was methodically pointing out misplaced equipment and areas where security footage was intentionally blocked. She was practical, relentless, and smart. Adrian, who usually stood apart, found himself working side by side with her, clearing debris and reviewing old structural diagrams. As they cleared out a storage area recently used by the sabotage executives, Clara pointed to a worn metal desk shoved in the corner. "Look at this," she said. Beneath a pile of old inventory manifests, they found a small, leather-bound notebook. It wasn't Adrian's handwriting. Inside were cryptic notes detailing the Q3 leak and other planned moves. But one name appeared repeatedly in connection with the sabotage: Richard Vale. Adrian froze. Richard Vale wasn't just some executive. He was the late Richard Sterling's business partner, the man who had been Adrian's godfather and a member of the original leadership during the time of the factory explosion. Adrian realized the sabotage wasn't new. It was a decades-old plan finally coming to a head, possibly engineered by the man his father trusted most. This discovery was a shock that went deeper than business. It meant his father's past was darker than he knew, and the threats were far closer than he imagined. He looked at Clara, and in her eyes, he saw not judgment, but fierce solidarity. "We need to find out everything about Vale," he said, his voice rough with realization. Meanwhile, Maya, fueled by jealousy and believing she was protecting Adrian from a deceitful janitor, acted on her own private mission. She had printed the documents proving Clara's father, Daniel Hale, was the allegedly forged culprit in the factory explosion. Maya believed this proved Clara's vengeful motive. She didn't take the file to Adrian. She decided to use it as leverage. Maya quietly left the Sterling building and drove across town. She found Richard Vale, the man Adrian now suspected of treason, and delivered the damning paperwork right to his home. "This is proof, Mr. Vale," Maya whispered, handing over the folder. "The janitor is the daughter of the man who supposedly caused the Sterling explosion. She is dangerous. Use this to discredit her and take control from Adrian." Richard Vale, holding the forged report of Daniel Hale's guilt, smiled, a chilling, predatory smile. Maya thought she was saving the company, but she had just handed the villain the perfect weapon. Back at the warehouse, Adrian watched Clara wipe the dust from her hands. Their bond had deepened over shared labor and a shared enemy. He knew now she wasn't just a janitor. She was the only genuine ally he had. He didn't know the file Maya delivered existed, but he felt the sudden, growing danger. The file was back, but this time, he and Clara were standing in the blaze together. The executive staff meeting at Sterling Industries was never a relaxed event, but today, the air felt toxic. Adrian Sterling stood at the head of the long mahogany table, ready to present the initial findings on Richard Vale's sabotage. His face was set, cold, and utterly professional. But Maya had been working, and she wasn't going to let Adrian proceed without first dealing with the threat. She waited for a pause in the discussion, then stood up, her voice trembling with false sincerity. "Mr. Sterling, before we discuss Mr. Vale, there's a personnel matter that directly affects this company's security and, frankly, your trust." Adrian narrowed his eyes, annoyed by the interruption. He looked at Clara, who was quietly serving coffee in the corner. Maya slammed a thick file down on the table. It contained the complete background check on Clara Hale, alongside the old, forged report naming Daniel Hale as the factory explosion culprit. "Ms. Hale is not who she claims to be," Maya announced, her voice rising dramatically. "Her employment references are vague, and her degree credentials are easily faked. She is the daughter of Daniel Hale, the man responsible for the 1998 Sterling Mill disaster. She is here for revenge." The room erupted. All eyes snapped to Clara. She froze, the coffee pot still in her hand, the sudden silence of the room heavier than any sound. Her secret, the terrible, painful reason she was there, was exposed. She hadn't lied about who she was, but she had certainly hidden her connection to the explosion. Adrian stared at her, his expression shattering from cold professionalism into pure, painful betrayal. He didn't look at the files. He looked only at her eyes, searching for denial, a reason, anything to explain the deceit. The trust that had sparked between them during the storm was now being doused by the harsh light of reality. "Clara," he said, his voice low, dangerously quiet. "Is this true? Did you know your father was connected to the 1998 tragedy?" Clara couldn't look away from his face. She saw the devastation there. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But my father was a hero. That report is a lie, a cover-up your father created to protect the company. I came here to prove the truth." "You came here under false pretenses," Adrian countered, cutting her off. He couldn't hear the truth through the sting of her deception. "You broke the rules, you lied about your intentions, and you compromised my company's security. I told you I lost my trust in people a long time ago. Now I remember why." He straightened his back, the billionaire's armor snapping back into place, colder than ever before. "You're fired, Ms. Hale. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out." Clara put the coffee pot down, her whole body shaking. Tears finally slipped down her face, not tears of shame, but of fury and heartbreak. She looked directly at Adrian, her voice ringing with finality. "You can fire me, Adrian, but you can't fire the truth. You think I betrayed you, but your own father betrayed mine. I will still prove what really happened, and when I do, you'll be the one left with nothing." She turned and walked out, leaving her mop, her uniform, and her broken heart behind. Her mission wasn't over. It was just beginning. She left the gilded halls of Sterling Industries in tears, but with a vow ringing in her ears. She would uncover the truth and find the justice her father deserved. Clara didn't slow down when she was fired. She just aimed her determination in a new direction. Gone were the cleaning carts and the executive passes. Now, her workspace was a small, dusty corner of the public library, and her tools were old microfiche readers and online archives. Her goal was clear: prove the Daniel Hale disaster report was forged. She started by looking into the factory's safety audits from the late 90s. It was grueling work, cross-referencing public records with old news reports. Then, deep within an archive of regional building permits, she found it, a document showing that a critical safety feature at the Sterling mill had been signed off as defective just 2 months before the explosion. The signature approving the faulty part wasn't Adrian's father, Richard Sterling. It was his business partner, Richard Vale. Clara had found the truth. Vale had falsified the records years ago, protecting himself while framing Daniel Hale. The old Mr. Sterling, blinded by friendship, had likely just believed his partner and signed the resulting cover-up report. Vale wasn't just the modern saboteur. He was the original culprit in her father's death. Meanwhile, back at Sterling Industries, Maya was reading the very same document she had exposed at the board meeting. She compared the dates, the file numbers, and the tiny inconsistencies. She saw the evidence of Richard Vale's recent tampering and started to realize the deeper betrayal. Clara hadn't been an assassin. She had been a truth seeker. Maya's jealousy and fear had made her a pawn, and she had just handed Adrian's enemy the weapon to destroy him. A wave of regret and fear washed over her. She was telling the truth, Maya whispered to herself, staring at the old factory reports. Clara was innocent. The company, once a beacon of stability, was now crumbling fast. Richard Vale, with the forged factory report in hand, was using the threat of scandal and his own deep knowledge of the company to dismantle Adrian's control. Adrian was fighting blind, still convinced Clara's initial deception was the root of his problems. He was alone, isolated, and overwhelmed. Clara, looking at the screen displaying Richard Vale's signature on the defective safety report, felt a rush of both victory and dread. She had the proof her father deserved, but she knew this was bigger than personal revenge. Richard Vale was the real enemy, threatening to destroy everything. She had to go back. She had the truth, but she needed Adrian's strength to fight the battle. Clara's furious digging had led her away from the polished floors of Sterling Industries and into a quiet, forgotten part of the city. She wasn't holding a mop. She was holding a stack of old files and staring at a bronze plaque on the wall of a small, aging community center. This was the place where the families affected by the Sterling mill disaster held their yearly memorial, the true tribute to her father. She was wiping dust off the plaque when a sleek, black car pulled up quietly outside. Adrian Sterling got out. He looked tired and defeated, his expensive suit rumpled, the weight of the company's collapse visible on his face. He had been looking for her since Maya's betrayal, had raised his suspicion about Richard Vale. He followed a hunch, checking the places his late father had once cared about. He found Clara there, kneeling by the plaque, not scrubbing a floor, but honoring a memory. He saw the inscription, Daniel Hale, lost in the 1998 mill fire. "Clara," he said, his voice quiet. "I need to know everything." Clara stood up, looking at the man who had fired her in rage. The fire in her eyes was now mixed with compassion. She didn't show him the files yet. She simply told him the story, not as a janitor seeking revenge, but as a daughter seeking truth. She spoke of her father's honesty, the ignored safety warnings, the gut feeling that led her back to the company, and the forged report she had found that wrongly blamed her dad. She pulled out the smoking gun, the document where Richard Vale's signature approved the defective safety part, years before the explosion. "Vale didn't just sabotage your company now," Clara explained, her voice steady. "He was responsible for the fire 25 years ago. He framed my father and your dad, blinded by loyalty, covered for his friend. That's why that photo was in your office. It's a betrayal your father couldn't face." Adrian looked at the signature on the paper, his world tipping sideways. The lies, the coldness, the obsession with control that had defined his life. It was all built on a massive lie created by the man he trusted. He realized his father wasn't a hero, and Clara wasn't a traitor. His guilt was utterly misplaced. He hadn't been betrayed by Clara. He had been betrayed by his own past. The shock was too much. The walls Adrian had built since his mother's death and his father's scandal, the cold, impenetrable fortress, finally crumbled. He covered his face with his hands, his whole body shaking with the force of silent grief and remorse. He wasn't the CEO anymore. He was just a man realizing he had unjustly destroyed the life of the only person brave enough to tell him the truth. He looked up, his eyes red and raw, and for the first time, Clara saw the depth of his soul. "Clara," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "I'm so sorry. For what my father did. For what Vale did. And for what I did to you." Clara stepped toward him and, setting aside their history, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. The stone-cold billionaire had finally broken down, not from failure, but from finding the truth. And in that moment, the need for vengeance left Clara's heart, replaced by a deep, unwavering empathy. The two people who had suffered most from Richard Vale's lies were finally standing together, their shared pain forging an unbreakable new bond. With the truth finally laid bare, the quiet grief and anger of the past turned into a laser-focused plan. Adrian and Clara sat together in the community center, the quiet hum of the building contrasting sharply with the plot they were hatching. They both knew that Richard Vale wasn't just a threat to the company. He was a liar and a murderer who had to be exposed. "Vale thinks I'm broken and alone," Adrian stated, his voice now firm, the remorse replaced by cold resolve. "We'll use that. We'll give him exactly what he expects." Their plan was a high-risk gamble. They had to fake a spectacular, public rift. Adrian would lash out against Clara in the media, blaming her for his company's current turmoil. He would claim she was a disgruntled former employee with a vendetta. Vale, seeing his enemy destroy himself over a woman, would think he had won and step out of the shadows to claim his prize. Clara was ready to play the part of the scorned woman, but the emotional cost was heavy. The money she had hoped to earn at Sterling was desperately needed now, because back in her small apartment, her mother's illness was rapidly worsening. Her mother, already frail, was her main focus, and the stress of this dangerous plot, combined with a lack of stable income, was crushing her. Clara felt the weight of her love and duty pulling her in one direction, while the need for justice pulled her in the other. The next day, Adrian's performance was flawless. He gave a sharp, vicious interview to a major business news outlet, publicly denouncing Clara as a dangerous, unstable employee who had misused his trust. The office gossip went nuclear. Clara, watching the news report, felt a real sting, even though she knew it was a lie. Richard Vale, reading the reports, smirked. He had Adrian exactly where he wanted him, isolated, angry, and focused on the wrong enemy. He saw the company's stock plummet and Adrian's reputation sink. Vale's greed began to overrule his caution. He started moving critical assets into his own control, setting himself up to swoop in and take over Sterling Industries. But Vale wasn't a fool. The sudden intensity of Adrian's public attack, following their deeply private elevator moment, felt too perfect. He ordered his security team to dig deeper, not into Adrian, but into the woman Adrian hated so publicly. Vale's search quickly uncovered Clara's frequent, desperate visits to the community center and her mother's specific medical history. Vale realized the public rift was a deception. He saw Clara not just as a pawn, but as Adrian's soft spot, and he decided to hit him where it would hurt most. Vale's eyes narrowed as he looked at the details of Clara's life. He was no longer focused on Adrian. He was turning his sights on Clara. The game had just escalated from a corporate battle to a dangerous, personal vendetta. Richard Vale moved with the precision of a snake that has cornered its prey. He knew Clara's mother was her weakness, and he didn't hesitate to strike. Clara was visiting her mother at home when the phone rang, a blocked number. A cold, oily voice on the other end delivered the threat. Stop digging, or they would stop paying for her mother's care and ensure the local community center, her father's memorial, was demolished before dawn. The message was clear. Obey, or lose everything precious to her. Later that night, as Clara was leaving the quiet apartment building, two shadows detached themselves from a nearby doorway. They weren't looking to negotiate. Before Clara could scream, one man grabbed her arm, twisting it sharply. They were rough, silent, and intent on causing pain. Just as fear turned to panic, a sleek black sedan roared around the corner and slammed to a halt, tires screeching. Adrian Sterling burst out of the car. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing the fury of a man who finally knows what he has to protect. Adrian didn't call the police. He knew Vale was too powerful for that. He simply stood between Clara and the two thugs, holding up his phone. Vale, Adrian's voice was ice. I know what you've done. We're done negotiating with threats. The thugs backed off, confirming they were Vale's men. Adrian immediately took Clara to a secure, quiet location, and from there, he made the biggest sacrifice of his life. He called Vale directly. He offered the impossible, the majority asset transfer of Sterling Industries, the company his family had built, in exchange for a full, verifiable stop to all threats against Clara and her mother. Vale, blinded by greed, accepted immediately. He transferred the documents to Adrian, proving his control and intention to seize the company, and in return, Adrian signed over his assets. The exchange was devastating. Adrian had lost his empire, but just before he completed the final transfer, he and Clara used the small window of time to recover the true evidence, Vale's own digital signatures on both the recent sabotage documents and the original falsified safety reports from 1998. The price was everything Adrian owned, but they had the proof. By dawn, Sterling Industries was essentially Vale's, and Adrian Sterling's reputation was utterly destroyed. The media tore him apart, painting him as a foolish CEO who gave away his empire to a hostile takeover because of a reckless janitor. He was homeless, ruined, and completely alone, except for Clara. She looked at the defeated man sitting beside her, the man who had traded his entire life for her safety. The cold billionaire was gone, replaced by a hero. Clara's heart swelled with gratitude and a powerful, protective love. He had lost the world, but he had finally gained his soul. And together, they held the key to his redemption. Richard Vale was basking in his triumph. He had seized Sterling Industries and called an emergency board meeting, broadcast live to the financial world, to solidify his control and dismiss Adrian's final, desperate actions. He sat at the head of the table, smiling, while Adrian's reputation lay in tatters. But Vale had forgotten one crucial factor. Clara Hale wasn't done fighting. Clara, dressed simply but radiating intense purpose, stormed into the glass-walled boardroom. She was the picture of a fierce, protective angel. Security tried to stop her, but her determination and the shock of the live cameras froze them in their tracks. Stop this meeting. Clara's voice was clear and commanding, cutting through the smug pronouncements of Richard Vale. Vale stood up, furious. Security, get this lunatic out of here. I'm no lunatic, Clara declared, holding up the smoking gun. The evidence recovered at the cost of Adrian's fortune. I'm the truth. Richard Vale didn't just sabotage this company. He murdered my father, Daniel Hale, 25 years ago and framed an innocent man to cover his tracks. She laid the documents on the table. The forged 1998 factory report placing blame on Daniel Hale, and the original safety document signed by Vale proving his own negligence. She then presented the recent digital signatures, proving Vale's current scheme to dismantle the company he helped destroy decades earlier. The boardroom exploded into chaos. The cameras broadcast every shocked face, every gasping board member. Vale's composure finally snapped. He lunged across the table, denying everything, his villainy exposed to the entire world. The media frenzy was instant and overwhelming. The full, heartbreaking story of the Sterling Mill disaster, the cover-up, and Adrian's desperate, selfless sacrifice to protect Clara hit every headline. The frenzy cleared Adrian's name completely. The world suddenly saw the cold CEO as a man who had traded his entire inherited empire for the life and truth of the woman he loved. The company was saved from Vale's grasp, but it was tainted by its own history. Later that day, with the chaos settled in Vale and police custody, Adrian stood before the stunned board. He didn't have to quit. The board would have begged him to stay, the hero who exposed the traitor. But he looked at the massive glass tower, no longer seeing a legacy, but a monument to his family's corruption. He looked at Clara, standing quietly at the side of the room. He saw not a janitor, but the future. Adrian spoke with quiet dignity. I have restored this company's security and exposed its deepest enemy. But this empire was built on lies, and I refuse to inherit a legacy of broken promises. He voluntarily resigned, walking away from the Sterling name, the wealth, and the power. He chose to end the Sterling Empire's corrupt history so he could start a true life. Clara walked up to him as he stepped out of the boardroom for the last time. She reached out and took his hand. No longer a janitor, no longer a daughter seeking revenge, but a woman standing beside the man who had sacrificed everything for her. He had lost his cold world, but he had found his humanity, his peace, and his true love. Justice was served, and love, born in the darkest of storms, had finally won. Months melted away, each one bringing quiet healing and hard work. The chaos of Sterling Industries was a distant echo, replaced by a deep sense of purpose in a smaller, humbler location. Clara, using the massive media attention and the initial settlement from Richard Vale's crimes, had founded the Daniel Hale Foundation. It was dedicated to workplace safety and supporting the families of industrial accident victims, a beautiful legacy built from painful tragedy. One cool afternoon, Clara stopped by the former Sterling building. It was under new, ethical management and undergoing a complete rebranding, ridding itself of the cold, corrupt history. She didn't come to gloat. She came to see the place where her life had irrevocably changed. She stood in the main lobby, now bright and inviting, remembering the terror and the triumph that had unfolded within those glass walls. As she stood there, lost in thought, a cleaning cart rolled slowly into view. It was a standard, metal janitor's cart, complete with yellow buckets and a mop. Behind it, pushing the cart with a quiet, easy rhythm, was a man in simple work clothes. It was Adrian Sterling. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit. He wore comfortable jeans, a plain, dark sweater, and thick rubber gloves. His hair was a little longer, and the cold, tight worry in his eyes was replaced by a gentle, peaceful contentment. He was simply working, scrubbing a scuff mark off the marble floor with methodical care. He looked up and saw Clara. He didn't stop cleaning, but a faint, genuine smile touched his lips, a smile that held history, humility, and love. Clara, he acknowledged, his voice soft. She walked toward him, not questioning his choice. He had given up the empire, the power, and the money, and was now building his life back one honest day at a time. The powerful, cold CEO was gone, replaced by a man who valued work, truth, and genuine connection. They didn't need to talk about Vale, the board meeting, or the media frenzy. All of that was the ruin they had escaped. Their shared pain and ultimate victory had forged something unbreakable, something far more valuable than a company. He had sacrificed his world for her safety, She had given him the truth that set his soul free. Clara simply stood there, watching him work, her heart full. They shared a long, quiet moment, rebuilding their future from the ruins of his past. He finally set the sponge down and looked directly into her eyes, the familiar warmth now shining brightly. Adrian, you were right. Clara, about what? Adrian, some things are worth cleaning up. Now we have come to the end of the story. Thank you for watching to the end. If the story touched your heart, tell us in the comment what city you are watching from. Like this video if you believe love can heal even the coldest hearts. And don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories like this.